Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. The Draft Professor is a group of podcasters bringing you daily draft podcasts and is home to the only dynamic mock draft simulator which allows fans to mock draft against other fans. The Draft Professor Simulator features a first-round challenge, 5 unique one-round drafts. The Draft Professor Simulator features a second-round challenge, 10 unique two-round drafts. All mock drafts are always picking against the fans and draft analysts which use the simulator. Every mock, every pick, every time. The Draft Professor also features ranked players functionality, where you can rank your favorite players at every position. Optionally, you can add tiers to your rankings to show what round you have the players graded in. The Draft Professor also features draft a team functionality, which allows users to snake draft a team of 22 players to demonstrate your my guys, compare player strengths, and discuss draft prospects in a way no other mock draft simulator can. Thank you for tuning in to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Well, welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. Brandon, I think you made it in before we did.
Nailed it.
Thanks for stopping by. So, Brandon, Houston Texans, right, Brandon? If I remember correctly who your team was. You've definitely been on a lot of our podcasts. So, thank you very much for being here literally when it starts. So, Randall, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing good. It's we avoided an ice storm up in Arkansas, so I'm glad I'm not going to lose power. But been a good day. Ready to talk about some interior defensive linemen. How are you doing, Jim?
I'm doing pretty good. I think that ice storm diverted itself to Cincinnati.
Did it? It pushed north, and that's why we missed it.
Yeah. So it was funny because, I saw salt trucks out yesterday.
Yeah.
And there was no snow.
Right. Yep.
And then you get a little thing. So I work on a military base. So the thing flashes up on the screen that says weather's coming. And I was about to go out the door and get my kids and stuff anyway. But I took my kids out to dinner and I was in flip-flops, but it was snowing. So yeah, it was a good sight to see.
Northeastern. I wear shorts in the winter every single day. So I feel that.
I think it's, if you grow up in Buffalo, you can wear flip-flops in the snow.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
All right. Absolutely. So we're going to do some defensive tackles today. We had a guest lined up, but he had a child issue. So it's going to be Randall and I going through some defensive tackles. I would say that this is a pretty good defensive tackle class. What do you think, Randall?
It is. It's exciting. There's a lot of defensive tackles. How many are going to go in the first round will probably be insane. And, as us Buffalo Bills fans, it's exactly what we need. We can double dip if we want.
Yeah, and I even think the Houston Texans probably need a defensive tackle too. So, Brandon, I'm curious how high you think the Texans will take a defensive tackle, and are they looking more for the big guys or the agile guys? So feel free to drop that into the chat as we get through. But Randall, who is the top defensive tackle on your board?
Definitely Mason Graham, which I believe that is the consensus for the entire class sort of thing. He's a top 7 from mock drafts from what's coming up. He plays 66% of defensive snaps and amassed a 34 pressures, 5 sacks, and 9 quarterback hits. He's got a batted ball. He's got 28 solo tackles with 30 defensive stops, 7 tackles for loss this year. And on those tackles for loss, you're losing about 5 yards. So that's impressive. He gets in that backfield and makes the tackle. He can go anywhere, 0 tech to 5 tech, very explosive, has this ridiculous swim move and a rip to get through double teams and things like that. Got a great motor. 6'3", so at 6'3", 330 pounds, he gets that lower pad level and that leverage that he pushes them back. You see it time and time again that he just will push back the center of the guard, and that's where he begins, and then he'll amass into that pressure. But he's done it against great competition, done it consistently. It's a clear-cut number 1 for me.
And I can remember Marcel Darius as a defensive tackle going in the top 3.
Yeah, I got his jersey right here.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of other interior defensive linemen that have gone top 3.
Top 3 would be tough. Marcel Darius is a good one because he went in the Von year.
Yep. He was the Von Miller Consolation Prize.
Yeah.
That was the same draft that had like J.J. Watt, Cam Jordan.
Yep. Top 3, I'm not sure. I don't know if I can answer that at the moment, but.
Right. And then, but like Graham coming out of the top 6 would be, to me, that's like mathematically impossible.
Agreed. I would assume there's a lot of team needs there. I would assume that he ends up in that area. I mean, unless maybe he falls to the Jets at 7, and no matter what, they're taking him at 7, from what I would assume.
Yeah, so I think his floor would be the 7th pick, but I think he could go number 1 overall.
Number 1 overall? I think
he could. I think some people like him more than Abdul Carter. So for as much love as Carter gets on Twitter, I think some people actually have a better grade on Graham.
Yeah, I would say Abdul Carter's floor is lower based on his size and the way he pressures. I mean, he can kind of do it all, but Mason Graham's floor is higher and his ceiling's probably similar to Abdul Carter, and he can be that blue chip player that is. So I would be surprised. I guess, when Titans, when they released everybody and they talked about they wanted a blue chip player, a game changer, generational, everybody went immediately to Abdul Carter, but Mason Graham is an opportunity that should be a discussion for him. So that's a good point. And I'd be a little surprised, but I wouldn't be surprised at the same time.
Right. Now, everybody, when I've put Graham in round 1 to the Titans, everybody reminds me that Jeffrey Simmons plays for the Titans. Last I checked, most teams play to 2 defensive tackles, but what do I know? It's like, what do I know, or what does the feedback on Twitter know, right?
Right. And Mason Graham and Kenneth Graham are side by side communicating every single snap sort of thing. And they do so well together that they both increase their stock. So anybody that's going to be next to Mason Graham is going to help into Jeffrey Simmons and things like that. But Mason Graham's impact, when we reference, the generational rip through a guard or a center and then have that running back. I was watching the University of Washington game, and basically he just went through the B gap super quickly. The running back was supposed to block the edge, but he had to adjust his blocking to Mason Graham because he came in so quickly, which resulted in Josiah Stewart getting a sack sort of thing. That's the kind of impact he holds on that front line, is chaos, and that's what he instills.
Yep. And I remember we had a podcast a few weeks ago, probably at this point close to a month ago, we were talking about the positions that you build a team around. And one of the questions was, would you rather have a dominant unicorn defensive tackle or a dominant unicorn edge? Like, would you rather have the Chris Jones or the Myles Garrett?
Right. And
or would you rather have the Aaron Donald or the Micah Parsons?
Right. And defensive tackle for me. I mean, they contribute more and they impact more. Run game comes through them a lot more and things along those lines. Taking on double teams and everything like that, even helps out their edges. So let's say you have that interior defensive lineman that's powering through double teams. That's leaving the outside open. So even an above average edge will prosper from a generational defensive tackle.
Yep. And I'm all about the dominant defensive tackle. I would rather have Chris Jones than a Myles Garrett, right? I'm saying that's absolutely how I would build my team. Right. So I can see Graham going above Carter in the draft. I'm going to put that out there, everybody. The shortest distance to the quarterback is the player that's lined up closest to the ball.
Yeah, fair point. For sure.
Right? I mean, which takes us to our second. We each have, so it's Randall's board on the left and my board on the right. So you have Walter Nolan, number 2, Randall. So what do you like about Walter Nolan?
Workhorse to start. I mean, he goes again. He's somebody that actively goes from 0 tech to 5 tech. Will line up anywhere, and he has a motor on him. He played 75% of the total defensive snaps for his team, which is crazy. 48 total tackles, being 25 solo, counting for 32 defensive stops. He had 14 tackles for losses and 6.5 sacks and 4 QB hits. So he was in that backfield a lot. And you can see him take over a lot of games at times and just contribute and be impactful from start to finish. I mean, his South Carolina game, his Florida game combined for 11 pressures. It was absolutely nuts to watch him through Florida. It was a tie game for a while, but you could just see that he was keeping it close at times just from what he was doing. He almost single-handedly created a safety against Florida when they were playing him with a power move that was a big tackle for loss, going straight through the A gap, and then the same move attacking the B gap until the second blocker came in to help, which he was so close to getting to it, but that person came and saved the day from getting a safety. So single-handedly getting a safety was impressive to watch. His run support's really good, and his stats show that. Sometimes he has trouble disengaging with the offensive linemen that have longer arms because his arms may be a little shorter. I think they're in the 33-inch range, but he has that aggressive physicality that he can get through it at that times. Sometimes late in the fourth quarter and things along those lines, endurance is something to watch, but I'm looking at him lining up from 0 tech to 5 tech in one game sort of thing, and then playing 75% of defensive snaps. Any team that picks him up and he knocked that down to 65%, and I bet that endurance kind of sticks with him, especially with NFL strength and conditioning and things along those lines. So I love everything that I see from Walter Nolan and his motor and what he's willing to do for his team and how impactful he is. That's an easy number 2 for me.
And one of the questions I remember with talking about this with Newt and Owen when they finished their defensive tackle scouting reports. And Nolan was getting comped to Aaron Donald, but you can't like Aaron Donald is one of one, right? It's kind of
Right.
like the best Cooper Kupp, right?
Yeah.
But there was because I was basically saying, can a 280-pound defensive tackle go in the top 10? Right? How many guys that are that small have gone in the top 10? I think Ed Oliver went 9th overall, right?
Correct.
And then Kalijah Cansey went in the teens, correct?
Yeah, low, like 11 or 12. And yeah,
so it was still okay.
Was
actually closer to the
earlier.
top 10 than it was to 19. I thought it was later.
No, I believe it was 12. It was I think it was 11 to 14. But yeah, I mean, he did have those measurables for Kalijah Cansey, and they were comparing him to Aaron Donald. I do feel bad because, in that Bucks game with Jaden Daniels, I believe he has like 31-inch arms, and that unfortunately was a detriment to him when Jaden Daniels ran to the right and he got stiff-armed. Unfortunately, he didn't have that arm length, so it kind of showed. So you hold a valid point, and if you have those low measurables on those impactful drives, is that going to be a detriment? And it was for Kalijah Cansey in that one rep he had, a very important rep.
Yeah, so it's like you dominate. It's like you dominate the regular season, and then that trait that you get knocked on may have cost you a playoff game.
Yeah, because I mean, even Jaden Daniels wasn't necessarily ready to take that stiff arm, but his arm length beat him out, and that's how we got over to the side and ended up getting that. I believe it was that final touchdown. So it was impressive, but Kalijah Cansey really had a good year. So obviously he can learn from that and tape and things along those lines. So I do like Kalijah Cansey in itself, but you are right. Like, where is all his measurables, and is it worth that top 15 pick? For Walter Nolan, I believe he is. I think he's super powerful, and the willingness to go from 5 tech to 0 tech and do everything, I think he is worth a top 10, and I would take a flyer on him.
Yeah. So your number 3 is Kenneth Grant. So what is it about Grant that you will, I'm going to say, have him so high? I don't want to make that sound like negative, but what is it about Kenneth Grant that you have him, let's say, over Collins and Harmon?
I do. I love Kenneth Grant first, I think he does have one of the highest floors in the defensive line with Mason Graham sort of thing. Them working together obviously helped each other out. 6'3", 339 pounds. He played 66% of the defensive snaps, but he gets to the quarterback. He's always in the backfield, and he's super powerful. 27 pressures, 3 sacks, got a QB hit, mainly coming out of the A gap and the B gap. He's got 5 batted balls. The closest person to him is Alfred Collins in batted balls. 22 defensive stops, 5 tackles for losses, and all those he averages about six yards per loss when he gets those. So that's super impressive. His constant production and being on a national championship winning team is always helpful. He was on the Feldman's freak list. He almost got 19 miles per hour on the GPS. He'll run under a 540. His 10-yard split will be interesting, maybe like a 170. That'll be super interesting to see. So he's an athlete in itself, and he showed that. Run side to side. If there's an outside run, he is the one chasing him down. Honestly, I see him chasing an outside run more than Mason Graham. He's got a motor on him, and he won't stop doing it. Super explosive. Got a good rip and swim move for that A gap too, so he can get through that center. I like him with the high floor, and then his ceiling doesn't cut off either. So I don't to have the high floor, but then also have the high ceiling as well is where I put him at 3. And I think you can plug and play him, especially have it being in Michigan and being a national championship. Learn quick, get ready to be a year 1 impact starter.
Okay. And then on my board on the right, I have Derek Harmon at 3. And this is from my interpretation of listening to the scouting reports on all these guys, specifically from Newton Owen. And you can hear their detailed reports on the player. Owen seems to think that Derek Harmon, of all the defensive linemen that we haven't talked about yet, has the highest ceiling. So the floor on Grant is higher, but if Harmon, with his athletic ability and the missed tackle rate that Harmon has, Owen says, okay, that's something that you can clean up with coaching. So if Harmon cleans up the little things in his game, with his athleticism, he might actually be the 3rd best prospect in the class. And when we look back at this in 6 or 7 years, we could say we were too low on Harmon because of that athletic ability.
Yeah.
Now, granted, Harmon has 1 year at Oregon, and he was at Michigan State, I believe, a couple years before that, right?
Correct. Yeah. And then his breakout year was coming into Oregon, which I don't think that it was a switch, because I don't think it was Michigan State's problem, realistically. I think he was still learning, and then going into Oregon's system really helped him explode, sort of thing. So that idea of the ceiling 100% makes sense, because he broke out last year, and in the correct way. It wasn't, Oregon, great school, played against great competition. He didn't have any major flaws that you were looking other than the missed tackle rate and things along those lines. So there's no reason to think that he's just going to keep ascending. And I do believe I wouldn't be surprised if Derek Harmon goes in the 12 to 20 area, because I wouldn't be surprised. His combine interviews come really good. His knowledge of the game is really good, sort of thing. So if a team falls in love with him, it makes sense to take him in that first round, especially when you only have 16 to 17 first round grades. When you're picking in that 14 to 17, pick who you want, sort of thing. But Derek Harmon, you're right. The athleticism is there. 10.5 tackles for loss this year with 5 yards per that loss. The 55 pressures is insane for somebody sitting at 6'5", 310. He is a little slimmer, Kenneth Grant's 339, Mason Grant's 330. Walter Nolan, I believe, is right around that 310 as well, but he kind of moves around. Derek Harmon normally comes just through the B gap and sometimes over the tackle. But his athleticism is nuts, and he can kind of scour through a double team and with his contact balance and just kind of get through, but then also be able to power and bull rush. So his ceiling is very high, and it makes sense. I have him as a 5 because I personally like Kenneth Grant's floor, and his ceiling could be close to Derek Harmon's, and I'm just kind of in love with Alfred Collins. But that's very respectable to have him at 3rd as well.
Right. So you're going to notice that Randall and I both have Alfred Collins quite high. There's going to be, and I'm going to say that we're higher than consensus. But there's probably a good reason for that. Randall and I are both Bills fans. And if Collins falls to Buffalo at the end of round 1, Collins is probably going to go somewhere between 25 and 45 in the draft.
Yeah, and consensus right now is closer to 45, while we're at 25 for sure.
Right. And if you're not familiar with Alfred Collins, he sat behind a couple of very high NFL draft picks in T'Vondre Sweat, and the name is escaping me, but did he go to Seattle? Who is the other Texas defensive tackle?
Leo. Oh my God, why can't I think of it right now?
Yeah, I'll look it up in a minute. But what do you want to tell everybody about Alfred Collins?
Oh yeah, so big fan of Alfred Collins. I would say he is probably arguably number 2 or number 1 best run defender as a nose tackle for sure. Number 1 probably being, which we'll talk about, Tyleik Williams, but he plays more as a 3 tech. But I mean, he played 60% of defensive snaps. He's got 55 tackles with 27 of them being solo, 5.5 tackles for loss while losing 5 yards on those last, 18 pressures with a sack. He's got 6 batted balls, 1 forced fumble. That forced fumble came from my favorite Arkansas, but it was coming on an outside. It was coming on an outside run, and he pulled over to the left, adjusted, and Supermaned the ball out of him. And it was so athletic for a 320-pound man. I could not believe my eyes, sort of thing. So he's super impressive. That game, he had 3 pressures to sack, 4 defensive stops, and a forced fumble. Great run defender, can eat double teams. Probably the best double team eater, in my personal opinion, in the draft. He can get through that middle and power through, swim move in between them, and take down. A lot of those tackle for losses are on double teams, to be honest, and he does really well at that. He's good at disrupting. He's got a powerful pushback, so guards and centers always take a step back when he's moving on there, and he's a super sound tackler. With 55 tackles, his missed tackle rate's only at 3%, while he has that gigantic motor, and he's always trying to get those tackle for losses and sacks. I think just like Derek Harmon, Alfred Collins' ceiling is just ascending, and since he was behind T'Vondre Sweat and great defenders like that, once he gets the NFL, he'll learn more, get more reps in, be more NFL ready, and be ready to be an immediate impact.
Yeah, and there's definitely with Collins, it's a projection, and you're projecting some traits. You have, like you said, like 1 year of tape. It's good tape. Normally, you like to see 2 years of tape when you take somebody in round 1.
Right.
Right. The number of times a player goes in round 1 with 1 year of production is relatively low.
Yeah.
Like Xavier Legette did that last year.
Right.
But generally, I think NFL GMs tend to like 2 years of production.
Yeah, and I'm curious to hear how GMs put it as sitting behind a player. I don't think Alfred Collins will have as an immediate impact as T'Vondre Sweat, because T'Vondre Sweat, if I'm not mistaken, was about 340, 345 when he was coming out of the NFL draft. So he was just a large human being that ran like a 4.7 40, if I'm not mistaken, in the combine. So his power and agility kind of matched up. And I was surprised about how much of an impact Sweat had at Tennessee. Taking it to Tennessee, had a pretty down year on it, but he just did his thing individually, and it was very impressive. But I do believe that Alfred Collins can be his own style of impactful in the way that he is more of a run filler, hole filler for run defense, and gap filler and things along those lines. And then with his run defense, learning more of the pass rush. T'Vondre Sweat has a little bit better pass rush.
Yep. So, Brandon, this is a really good question, because Randall and I were talking about this a little bit before the show. So I guess the first question that I would pose to Randall is that, Randall, do you look at a draft and say you want to grab a player that makes an immediate impact, or do you want to grab a player where 3 or 4 years from now you may have the most elite player in the draft? Like, how do you weigh that normally? And then did you change your mind this year?
Normally is full on ceiling first. And then, if the floor is too low, sort of thing, don't bite. But if they have a sound floor, always take the ceiling, because you're always looking to utilize them more in their second contract and their extension, always trying to keep your own players in your house. So I'm always going for the ceiling, especially if somebody has a super high ceiling. as we talked about in Buffalo with Xavier Legette, we all wanted Xavier Legette because what was his ceiling? A more athletic, almost Debo Samuel, if you will. So that's what's intriguing. So the ceiling always is. This year for Buffalo, because I believe that we completely overachieved this year, and now we have even shorter rebuild than we thought. I'm looking at high floor this year to get somebody in because our interior pressure on defensive linemen, thankfully this class is so deep, was so bad on the interior pressure and run stopping ability that we need players to step into a role and let people like Daquan Jones take a step back in the depth chart. Yeah, there you
That
go.
was Brandon. That was really good. Like, that's really good. So
But typically ceiling.
Randall and I are both Bills fans, and we don't agree on how he would just say that. So the way I would solve, instead of trying to get players with high floor, I would definitely draft for the ceiling. I would just make sure I take 2 players at the position.
That's fair. That way, but then when we're losing
one
a
of
third,
them misses,
yeah,
we've got the other.
Yeah. No, I mean, I like that thought process, but then we also need a cornerback and wide receiver. So then we're looking at, are we doing a defensive lineman in the first round and then at 107 in the beginning of the fourth, which I think is fair. And then you can look at somebody like Jamari Caldwell that's at the bottom of our list, or Omar Norman Lott sort of thing, and Wood. And then, yeah, then you're trying to take a hit, and you could hit both, or you, honestly, with this draft, you probably are going to hit both.
Yep. And Brandon, the last thing I'll say is I think Collins is a better prospect than Sweat. It just based upon, and keep in mind, Brandon, like most of what I'm doing is I'm listening to people like Randall, and I get a front row seat to all these podcasts and all these players, right? And I don't know. I think Draft Twitter may have put Sweat in round 1, but
yeah,
I didn't
after the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, I didn't hear too many people putting Sweat like in their top 35.
I do think Alfred Collins' overall game tape was better than Tavondre Sweat's when it was coming out, but then his offseason was unreal. He had that insane rep in Senior Bowl versus the Arkansas center that I can't think of. I can't remember where he got drafted. That
was
basically
was that JPJ?
No. It was Arkansas center, so it wasn't because he was Oregon. I can't remember who got drafted, but he basically bended him in half, like standing up, then just bended him, 90 degrees sort of thing. And that's when everybody got their, oh yeah, that's right. And then that's when, that's when they got his buzz and then people started watching him. But then, yeah, he got that DUI, which that's when Tavondre Sweat with his weight was kind of an issue, but that's why he fell into those 40s and then got a steal from the Titans.
Yeah, I'm checking something real quickly here on Sweat. So he went pick 38.
38, yeah.
And I had to verify he was round 2 and not round 3.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think there's a chance that Collins gets drafted after 38. But if Collins gets drafted after 38, that would be either a sign to me that like some teams in the back of round 1 either traded back or traded up to go get a guy.
For sure. And as you have discussed, for sure, is how well the offensive line has been doing in this offseason post the collegiate career. And I do think that you're right in that 35 to 45 range, or maybe 35 to 48 range, how many offensive linemen go on a run sort of thing and actually take up a lot of that space in the second round, and then leaves better players in that back half of the second as well.
And if you look at the graphics, we're relatively similar in our rankings, right? Meaning that the top 7 players are identical on both. And Randall and I are essentially each saying that Tyleik Williams could go in round 1, right? So the color that Tyleik Williams is, that green color, is a round 1-2 grade.
Mm-hmm.
We're basically saying that they're all in the top 40.
Yeah. I mean, Tyleik Williams is kind of that, that everybody knows name sort of thing because they won the championship and things along those lines. And he is arguably the best run defender in the class, without a doubt. He just bullies people. It's incredible to watch him in run defense. He'll just sit there and just stretch out, watch as the play happens, rip and tackle. It's incredible to watch. Just no pass rush.
And I think that the question, if you're an NFL GM that needs a defensive tackle, look at players 3 through 6 on both of our lists. We have them in different orders, but it's the same players.
Right.
The question is, do you trade up to get one of those guys, or are you happy getting the fourth guy? Like, because if you're a GM and you're saying, well, Tyleik Williams solves the defensive tackle depth chart issue of whichever team needs that big defensive tackle. If you look at Tyleik Williams and say, I like that floor, and Tyleik Williams is a high floor player, he probably might, I think out of players 2 through 6 on our boards, Tyleik Williams might be the safest player out of those.
Yeah, I agree. I'm curious and let me know if I'm talking wrong in this aspect. But remember last year when wide receivers was such a deep class, and then it got to our pick, and we ended up trading back. You had 25, Brian Thomas Jr., and then it came to us, and then we moved back because we had a specific guy. KC moved up because they wanted Xavier Worthy. Then 31 came where it was Pearsall. Then it was 32 that we traded back with Carolina to get 32 so they could get Xavier Legette. Then we took Keon Coleman. Then Jalen Polk went after. So I'm curious to see how that, if teams will wait and just go by it, or every specific person has their guy that they want, and we do start seeing that kind of weird magic happen at the end of round 1.
Yeah. So I think there's a legit question to say, from 3 through 6, is there a player worth trading up for? That would be if I'm an NFL GM, because the drop off from Nolan to Grant, what's the difference between Nolan and Grant in your big board?
I would not far at all. Nolan, I believe I have in the late 8 to 10, and then Kenneth Grant I have in the 18 to 22. So I guess a decent amount when you're looking at it just as the first rounder sort of thing.
10 spots in the first round is actually kind of big.
Yeah, that is, for sure. Touche. But as with, like, personally, as Buffalo, I'm such a big fan of Kenneth Grant that I'd be willing to do a 3 to 4 to 5 pick trade up to get Kenneth Grant. I think he has a small gap in between Alfred Collins and Derek Harmon. So I would be willing to do a 4 to 5 pick trade up for Kenneth Grant, nothing more than, trading a 4th rounder or future second round or 3rd rounder sort of thing like that to get him not to use too much capital. But I would say that there's a small gap.
Yep. So Tyleik Williams is who you have at 6. What do you want to tell everybody about Tyleik Williams?
Yeah, Tyleik Williams moves well for 330. 6'3", has that good height where you can get lower pad levels. Still played with that weight, 60% of the defensive snaps on that Ohio State line, which is impressive. Has 46 tackles with 16 of them solo, 23 defensive stops, 8 tackles for losses. As you can see, when he's basically the best run stuffer in the draft for sure. Has had 2 good years of production at Ohio State with very similar stats in 2023 as well. Similar tape too. He just kind of grew on his traits and his knowledge of the game in 2024. Super explosive. He's going to run a crazy 40 as well. He's super fast. He was on Bruce Feldman's list for running a 1.62 10-yard split, which is not nuts. He has a good bull rush, and he's super powerful. If he gets on the outside shoulder of a guard, he typically will win. But he kind of just sits back and holds in the run game. I'm not sure if that's Ohio State scheme or what he has to show in pass rush, but his pass rush kind of isn't there. He'll kind of contain more and work on the run game or set the outside edge and kind of close the gap with Ohio State's front 4 being so good. He'll kind of help close the gap to create chaos and then have the outside edges, Jack Sawyer and JTT, come through and get those sacks and things along those lines. So he's an all-team player, and I really like his style. Pass rush is the only thing that concerns me because I don't see many moves. I don't see him going vertical often. He likes to move laterally a little bit more. But again, probably, as you said, one of the highest floors in this class and the best run stuffer in the draft. So you're getting a powerful, impactful player from the beginning.
Yeah. So And like I was saying, is I was maybe comparing the top 6 on both lists. If your team needs a defensive tackle and you're happy with Tyleik Williams, you're probably going to be able to get Tyleik somewhere between 25 and 40.
Yeah, I would say so.
I would be like, I think that would be one of the things that I would pay attention to in the draft is where we have Tyleik. Does a team take Tyleik over anybody that we have ranked ahead of him? And that gives you a clue that GM drafts for the floor.
Yep.
They're drafting what they see, and they might see a 2-down NFL defensive tackle, and they're willing to say, I can take that in round 1. It's a safe pick. The probability that the GM is incorrect is low. And I think, like, if you're a new GM, you might pick Tyleik Williams over Collins and Harmon and maybe Nolan.
Yeah, no, for sure, because you are getting that floor. And I mean, as we talked about Dean talks about how Tyleik is basically going to be Buffalo's pick at 30. At 30. Yeah. So that's, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, I get it. And even if Buffalo did get Tyleik without the pass rush, then you're right. We double dip in the 4th round and figure that out because our run defense is bad. And there were a lot of bad run defenses in the NFL last year with how well the running backs are doing and how deep the running back class is. How do you combat that? Is definitely 100% somebody like Tyleik Williams.
Okay. And now this is where the fun part goes, is between 7 and 15.
Yeah.
Because I see players on Randall's list who aren't even on mine and vice versa. So we'll talk about some of these guys a little bit. We both have TJ Sanders at 7. But before we talk about TJ Sanders, I do want to give Newt a shout out because Newt will have Riley Mills above TJ Sanders. He loves Riley Mills from Notre Dame. He has Riley Mills in his top 50. And TJ Sanders in this spot would be still inside the top 50. And there are people who I have a lot of respect for that have TJ Sanders as the 3rd player on this board. Right? Ooh. So I believe it's Dale and Ryan Sparks, who've both been on this podcast, have Sanders as their 3rd best defensive tackle.
I mean, his mental part of the game is incredible. He pre-diagnosed plays very well. He had a play, I can't remember what game it was, but he diagnosed switch on offensive line. Center went to his partner, guard went over to him, sort of thing, and he knew it. And right when it snapped, he pushed the guard down that was supposed to tackle him and come through and then block a screen pass. It was one of the most impressive things I've seen, especially for a guy that's 6'4", 290. His mentals are there, so he can be an impact starter as well. It does make sense. 7 tackles for loss. He's got 5 sacks and 9 QB hits for 6'4", 290. He moves well. The combine will work for him. And 3's too rich for me. Yeah, I mean, 7 fits for me, to be honest. But I can't say that's wrong because I definitely get it.
Yep. And again, those are also guys that rank based upon the floor. And they're basically saying that they like the floor of Sanders more than the floor of a Collins or a Harmon. And that's, again, I'm beginning to see how people grade. And, you just listen to enough people give their scouting reports on how they grade. And I believe if you're grading for the floor, there's a good chance that you have Sanders higher.
For sure.
Yep.
I like his ceiling too, though. I mean, he started all but 4 games, but I mean the only thing that I'm curious about is if he wants to get up to 295 or 296 sort of thing and add a little bit of bulk, and so then he could be better at anchoring and sitting down and beating some of the offensive linemen with power other than just explosiveness would be something that he could add. But I mean, it's still high floor.
Yep. Now, I am not a Deone Walker stan account. You'll never confuse me with that. But you have Walker as number 8 on your board. So what do you like about Walker that you have him? I'm going to say that high. I don't have him much lower, but you're a little bit higher on him than me.
So Deone Walker, I really like his 2023 tape. And watching his 2023 tape I'm just kind of crossing my fingers based on his measurables and what he did in 2023 and how he operated in 2023 is what I'm hoping to get out of it. And I do think that he has a good chance at the combine to show his athleticism and everything that he can hold for to get him back in that spot. Because I do have him at 8 based on traits, size, and 2023 athleticism. It's just I'm hoping that he gets there. That's probably the number one most subject to change on my defensive line board, because if he doesn't, then realistically, I'm not taking him anywhere until day 3, because he plays with a high pad level and he gets stuck. Like sometimes when he's coming through, even a center, like during the Senior Bowl, he went up against Willie Lampkin, and Willie Lampkin stuffed him like pretty easily, and then Deion Walker stood straight up and stopped. He does that in 2024. He's done that time and time, where if he loses a rep or if he just gets bolstered, then he just stands up and stops and then kind of gives up on the play. And I'm not sure where that came from. I'm trying to figure out like what his weight was at in 2023. Maybe he was at 330. This year he's at 340, and that kind of made him a little bit more sluggish. But just trying to figure out, he looked a little bit thinner on 2023 too, so I'm curious if that's it. But if we can just get that juice of 2023 with 51 pressures, 8 sacks, and 4 quarterback hits, 12 and a half tackles for loss are those 2023 stats, 28 solo tackles. Like that's worthy of a first round grade on 2023. He just fell so far off in 2024.
Yep. So I have Darius Alexander next as 8, and you have him as 9th. What I like about Alexander is that it's the prototypical size for a 1-tech, really good athleticism for Alexander. And I think if Alexander played for a school that was in, let's say, the SEC or the Big Ten, he's higher on the list.
Yeah, no, I agree. Especially because like watching his tape, he just gets doubled consistently because they just game plan for him. So taking those double teams on, which is good because he's learned it and things along those lines. But a lot of the offensive line is gravitated towards him because he's the best player on that team, sort of thing. So I agree, but he's strong. I mean, he should break 34-inch arms for that length that you talk about at that 1-tech for that run support and shedding off blockers and things along those lines. He had a pick 6 against Pitt. That was really fun watch, to be honest with you. But he's got it all. 7.5 tackles for loss, got 37 pressures. He's a powerful. He's basically a bull rush and a power move, which in my opinion, big pass rush repertoire is not what I'm looking for when I'm scouting. I'm looking at how you do it and do you well. If you can bull rush or power rush somebody 10 times and you're successful 8 of them, then why would you need to learn another move, sort of thing? He's quick. He'll run under a 5 flat 40. He's got good lateral movement. My only concern with him is if NFL teams take advantage of it, he does run vertically too much, and he's too honed in to the quarterback or honed into the running back, where tackles can just push him to the side and push him away from the pocket, or they can push him to the side to create a hole. Sometimes he needs to worry about gap integrity and containment other than just trying to get to the quarterback. So he just needs to hone in some of that power and work on creating chaos in the pocket instead of just kind of going straight for the quarterback.
Yeah. So the next player I have is Nazir Stackhouse. Randall has him, I'm guessing, on the next page.
I do.
But the way that I would describe Stackhouse is that if you miss on any of the guys in the top 6 and you need a run defender, you're probably going to go for Stackhouse in round 3 or 4. Yeah. I don't see Stackhouse making it out of the top 120.
I think that's fair. I think his time in Georgia consistently as a national championship, that national championship year was potentially his best year, in my opinion, and how well he did with that team and things along those lines. He's a big guy that is that 1-tech only. He's a great run stopper. He needs to work on his pad level a little bit and things along those lines. But I like Nazir Stackhouse. In the beginning of the year, I had him pretty high, top 10, and then he just kind of fell off this year with the other defensive linemen kind of showing out over him, sort of thing. More people produced better and had better tape this year than Nazir, even though he's time and time through year and year at Georgia done well.
Yep. And then if you look, for the most part, the only difference in the top 10 between Randall and me, Randall had Walker, I had Stackhouse. It's the only difference in the top 10. We changed our orders, but there was really only one player that was different.
Yeah, and we do no group thinking at Draft Professors either. So this is
we
not
made these completely independent of each other. So the next two players I'd like to talk about are Riley Mills and Shamar Turner. And if you're looking for a 3-tech, both of those guys would fit that bill. Turner's going to be a little bit different, though, because Turner, you could see him line up at a 3. You could see him line up as a 5. You could see him line up as a 7. So Turner's been used in a lot of places along the defensive front. So depending upon what your defensive coordinator likes to do with athletic defensive linemen, like I can see both Mills and Turner, if a team runs an odd front, I could see them being drafted to play defensive end for an odd front, like a 3-4.
Yeah.
I can see a team where maybe they have reasonably good defensive tackle depth, but they want a piece that they can move along the line. Okay, that would probably be Shamar Turner.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way he can go from 0 to 7 sort of thing is he is built, his legs from the waist down, super built, super thick thighs, has explosion through that on that lower half of the body, and that's why he's able to kind of go through there. On an edge, he can just power through on the outside shoulder. At that 1-tech, he can just leverage out and push up and go through. So that's where his versatility comes through. His lower half of the body is pretty insane to watch, and that's how he can gain leverage from almost everybody on the offensive line. So I agree.
And then what do you have on Riley Mills? Because we went straight to Turner. We didn't talk about Mills.
Riley Mills, only played 52% of the defensive snaps, but he had 34 pressures coming from that 3-tech, 8 sacks, 5 QB hits, had good production all 3 years at Notre Dame, which was great. 32 pressures in 2023, 23 pressures in 2022. So he still had similar tackling stats with 37 tackles, 19 solo, 21 defensive stops, 8.5 tackles for loss. So his consistent production raises that floor, which I loved about Riley Mills, and that's why he's in my top 10. He's got good length for run defense, can shut off blockers with his long arms. He had a 7-pressure, 2-sack game against Georgia Tech, a 3-sack game and 4 defensive stop against Florida State. The only thing that I don't like is his initial burst isn't anything to write home about. It's almost like he's kind of playing a chess move on the line and figuring out where he wants to go first instead of taking that initial burst on it. Another knock that might be is he kind of moved to edge and 3-tech back and forth, and it from what I read is that it kind of fluctuated with his weight. He was fluctuating with his weight with his career, so he kind of went back and forth in some positions that impacted his position and style. And he'll be 24 coming out as a rookie, so he's an older rookie. So that might be a couple things on him, but overall, his floor is high. He's smart. He knows what to do with his physicality, and he's definitely top 10.
A really good motor.
Real good motor.
Raved about Riley Mills' motor.
Oh, yeah.
So, okay, so there's a group of players, and like if you look at Randall's list from 12 down to 15, he has Howard Cross, Omar Norman-Lott, Ty Hamilton, Jamari Caldwell. And then that's where I have Walker. I have Farmer. I have Peebles. And I have Howard Cross. So I think the only player we have in common with the next group is Howard Cross. So Randall, do you want to talk about him first and then your next 3 guys?
Yeah, definitely. A little bit smaller, 6'1", 288. So he's kind of like the Peebles size. I believe Peebles is 6 foot, even though he had a great Senior Bowl and stacked up at that 1-tech. But I mean, I like Howard Cross. He's got a good motor and he's quick. So he's kind of elusive in that 3-tech position. 19 defensive stops, 5.5 tackles for loss. He's got 22 pressures coming from there with 4 sacks and a QB hit. He has 6 years under his belt in college, so he's been through the ringer. 23 years old, will turn 24, I think, in March. He's got an explosive first step, and that's kind of what he is at 6'1", 288, which it does work. But his first idea is to elusively evade on that explosive first step and then see if you can get around with a bend or things along those lines. He does have difficulty with his frame getting off double teams, and sometimes he gets eaten up a little bit. But I do believe that in a fourth rounder, he is somebody that's willing to take a lot on his plate and be able to learn the system of whatever team he gets to pretty quickly.
Hey, and then you want to do Norman Lott, Hamilton, and Caldwell?
Sure, yeah. Norman Lott is an interesting one. I put him there because I do believe he has a high ceiling as long as he can kind of get through his character issues. He got suspended for having that fight at the end of the Florida game, I believe, but he ended up getting in that fight that got him suspended. There's some other things about his production. You can kind of tell because he hasn't started in a full collegiate year. He is coming off the bench and things like that. But when he comes off the bench, he's very efficient. He's super powerful, and he's a big bully at that one tech. He's got 18 total tackles, 8 solo, 4 tackles for loss. He basically averages like 20 snaps a game sort of thing. So it's not that much. So you could say that could be a good thing in some aspects as there's no wear and tear coming into the NFL. But then you can also say that the NFL playbook will be more difficult. He won't have as much experience, so that's an issue. But I mean, when I've seen him play, it seems very efficient to me. You know, against Alabama, he had some good pressure, some QB hits, and all he had was 16 snaps. So he's getting in there. He's got a good rip. He's got a good swim move. He's got a good motor. He pushes through the line on bull rushes. It's more or less kind of figuring out where he's at as a football player, and then his interviews is where he will definitely end up landing. I don't think he goes out of the mid to late third, but if his combine interviews are bad, he could fall to the 5th or 6th sort of thing.
A couple of other things I'll point out with Norman Lott. So, Brandon, you asked earlier about pass rush versus run defense. If your team has a bad run defense and you draft Omar Norman Lott, you still have a bad run defense.
Oh, yeah. All he wants to do is hit the quarterback. That's
right.
it. Yep.
Now, if your team cannot get an inside pass rush, draft Omar Norman Lott.
Yep.
Right. So the scouting report on Norman Lott, and it was, if you go back on the YouTube channel, watch the defensive line playlist. Okay. And Newt and Owen were the two that were doing it. And Norman Lott was one of the first guys that we covered. And it was, I'm going to call it funny. I was entertained. So, okay, let me rephrase that. It was entertaining. It doesn't necessarily need to be funny.
Yeah.
But so Omar Norman Lott, and it was like they said it's like a tale of two things. They said this is like one of the best interior pass rushers Newt and Owen have seen. They were raving about it.
Yeah.
And then they said he can't stop the run. And because they were doing interior offensive line and interior defensive line, and this was one of the first watches that they did, whenever they had to watch another guard, they watched him against Tennessee to see how he did against Omar Norman Lott. Because that way they had a really good idea of, right, well, we know that we like this player's ability to rush the passer. But if Omar Norman Lott ate him up in a running situation, they said he's probably not a good run blocker.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was their barometer.
Fair, right. Yeah.
I think there was at least 5 offensive linemen, like a couple from Alabama that played Tennessee and stuff that they had to do later. They always mentioned the Norman Lott game when they gave their scouting reports. It was hysterical.
Yeah, I referenced the Alabama game because he did well against those guards, and it was impressive to watch because he only had 16 snaps. But those 16 snaps were so efficient. So, yeah, I mean, that's a very good barometer. I kind of like that. I'm going to start using that.
Yep. And then I like that you have Hamilton that high. What do you like about Hamilton?
I mean, honestly, with the Ohio State front four and how they operated, I think he will come. He has a high floor to begin with. I mean, he is a little light in the 295 range, but I mean, 51 total tackles, 14 solo, 6 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, 1 QB hit, mainly coming from the B gap on the other side of Tyleik Williams. He's a really good tackler, only has a missed tackle rate of 7%. I do think he got a little bit underlooked because of that front four was so dynamic, and Ty Hamilton might have been the fourth out of that front four sort of thing. So he got kind of lost in that mess. But he does a really good move at, which I do love. My one text is to push the center back and create chaos in the pocket. And I think Ty Hamilton does a really good job at pushing the guard or the center back to close the gap down and have the outside edges come through. And he does a really good job at that while helping run support. So he can be that player in that aspect on a two. He could be 3 down back to where he's helping in the run support well, but then also creating chaos to help your edges out.
Okay. And then you have Jamari Caldwell, and Brandon's got a Caldwell comment in the chat. So what do you want to tell Brandon about what you like about Jamari Caldwell?
All right, so Jamari Caldwell, big bowling ball over at Oregon next to Derek Harmon, which they, just like kind of Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, they helped each other out for sure. But he had a really good Senior Bowl, so it kind of opened up my eyes to check out the tape and things along those lines. And he is quick, and he's a freight train. So he's kind of like who I'm thinking. I know Jamari Caldwell's shorter because Deion Walker is 6'7", but that large weight and his quickness, I am excited to see him at the combine and see what he runs, because I think he'll get the attention on his agility and his athleticism to show this 340-pound man can move, sort of thing. But my one knock for him is he had a missed tackle rate of 20%. But even with Derek Harmon taking a lot of the statistics, stats and things along those lines, still had 29 total tackles, 16 of them being solo, 4.5 tackles for loss, 21 defensive stops. He's a freight train, can shed blockers. He has a long arms to shed those blockers in the run game. All he does is want to hit the quarterback as well. His run support isn't the greatest, and he can work on that. But he's a freight train that just goes vertical and laterally well, that just wants to tear people apart, sort of thing. His motor's great. His physicality is great. I think the combine can make him into a large combine the combine with the Senior Bowl can give him a big jump in ratings and draft stock. So I think he can become an easy force in the NFL as long as he learns some more pass rush.
Yep. And then on my list, I want to talk about Joshua Farmer. So if you haven't caught the podcast that we did last night, so that was Randall, Josh, myself, we were talking about players that have a lot to gain at the combine, as well as players that have a lot of traits. And Farmer has a lot of athleticism.
Yes.
So he's probably going to test well at the combine.
Definitely.
And if Farmer tests well, I think there's a good chance that Farmer is one of the first 15 interior linemen taken in the draft. Just teams like athleticism inside.
Now, my question for you is you have Deion Walker, then Joshua Farmer. So with your take on Deion Walker, why is Joshua Farmer behind him, if you don't mind me asking?
So you can't ignore Walker's 2023.
Right.
So meaning that Walker has done more. He just hasn't done it recently. I wouldn't suggest that Farmer has shown flashes, but nowhere near to the level that Walker did last year.
Fair. Very fair.
So I'm just low on Walker just because I don't want traits to be that high. I would rather get production from the players. Nearly everybody, I could probably flip Turner and Walker, but nearly everybody above them, above Walker, the film grade justifies their ranking.
No, I very much get that.
Walker, there's some traits, there's some projection, there's some inconsistency, but that was as far as I could push Walker down and still take myself seriously.
Yeah. No, makes sense, I guess. No, right? Definitely. I get that.
I had the ranking, and then I want him higher than Walker.
Right.
No, I want him, and I was kind of playing that game.
I know.
I could probably take Caldwell and move Caldwell higher than Walker.
Yeah.
Now, Walker's going to go way higher than I have him listed. I am not suggesting that Walker will be the 12th defensive lineman off the board. I am suggesting that if I'm handing this list to Brandon Beane, these are the guys that I would consider. Right.
Agreed.
And Brandon, if TJ Sanders is the first defensive tackle that Brandon Beane drafts, I may ask him to meet me outside the back alley. We need a bigger guy, but TJ Sanders is still a very good player. So
yeah. Well, let's see, because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, because Dane Brugler put out his top 100 today.
Well, I haven't seen it yet.
I believe so. TJ Sanders at 60. Darius Alexander at 67. Jordan Phillips from Maryland at 73. Deion Walker at 76. So he has Deion Walker at 76, and then Omar Norman Lott at 78. And then let's see, Joshua Farmer's at 88. Let's see if I can get any more real quick. Shamar Turner is 56.
You see, and I think Turner,
Alfred
because he has some
47.
flexibility as to which position he plays.
Right. I'm sure Bill is very high on Shamar Turner.
Yes.
Bill, if you're in the chat.
He usually lets us know when he's in the chat.
Yeah, I know he does. Tyleek Williams at 33. Walter Nolan at 29. Kenneth Grant at 26. Derek Harmon at 19. And then Shamar Stewart at 9. And Mason Graham at 4. So there's Dane's. There's Dane's pretty much top 10, or how many I did. But, I mean, all kind of in the same boat, but with a couple people falling back and a lot of people going up. So it'll be interesting to see.
Definitely. So, Randall, do you want to let everybody know who you are, how they can find you?
Yes. At Randall Slifer. You can find me on Blue Sky and Twitter. I interact with everybody on Twitter, so if you get a hold of me, I will always try to respond. And I'm doing all my draft content with Draft Professor, so I'm here on Tuesdays and anywhere else I can fill in. We do 32-round GM mock drafts on Friday. I try and get in on those all the time because they are super fun. But yeah, you can find me on Draft Professor, and I try to do all my stuff here and on Twitter.
Cool. And you can follow the channel at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. It is the same on X, Twitter, and YouTube. We generally have 2 podcasts every day. There is another podcast that is starting in 30 minutes on offensive tackles. That is with Parker and Drew. So most days this week we'll have 2 podcasts. I am traveling on Friday. Small chance that there's a 32 GM mock on Valentine's Day. But I have to get to Washington, D.C. before I can commit to saying yes, that we can do that. But I think I'll be able to do that from my hotel room. And then, yeah, we just have more content coming at you literally every day from now up until the draft, 2 podcasts a day. There are 33 of us at the Draft Professor bringing you daily content, and we have guests. Our guest today couldn't come on, Cole Jackson taking care of his kid. I will reach back out to Cole, see if he can come back on again. And then we've got some more guests lined up for Thursday. But
Next
appreciate
Tuesday
everybody that is following the
next
podcast.
Tuesday, safeties with a guest, right?
Yeah, so it's safeties. It'll be you and Michael, which is Path to the Jags. He had to take a couple of weeks off from Draft Professors, but he's podcasted with us numerous times before.
Got it. Perfect.
So I think, and actually he usually likes to do DBs. Now I understand why he wanted to do safeties.
There you go.
It didn't click. He was the DB whisperer. The same way that you do it for wide receivers, he does it for DBs.
Perfect. I'll learn from him for sure.
Yeah.
All I know is Emenworry.
Yeah. So next week at this time, it will be a safety big board with Randall and Michael, which you would know Michael as Path to the Jags. So
perfect.
On behalf of Randall, myself, the 33 podcasters at the Draft Professor, thank you for watching. You are appreciated. To Brandon, to Jen, thank you for stopping by in the chat. and we will see you on a podcast again tomorrow. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode of Mrs. R Relevant, the Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. Please follow the Draft Professor on X at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. Please follow the Draft Professor channel on YouTube at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. We look forward to seeing you on our podcast tomorrow.